Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm delighted to welcome Chris Kendall, aka The Raw Advantage. If you're a subscriber, you've probably already seen him on the channel a couple of days ago, but I've really enjoyed the Q&A with Chris, so much so that I decided to have him on the channel. And I probably only asked about 10% of my questions, believe it or not, even though it may surprise you guys. So I just want to quickly introduce Chris very, very briefly, then I'll let him tell his story. But to me, Chris has been doing it, we'll round up, we'll say 20 years, this raw vegan lifestyle. He's also a pro skateboarder, raw chef. He's probably been to the moon, and I think he might be a trapeze artist as well. No, the last two I
All
lied.
true, all
But
true.
and he's also got a great physique. Yeah, he's built a great deal of muscle, as you can see, But Chris, could you just give your story briefly for the audience? I'm sure you've told it many times.
More than my pleasure, man. Thanks so much, Dillon, for having me on. I had a blast on the other Q&A as well, and I really appreciate all your questions. So I'm really excited to dig in with all the ones that you didn't ask. That's lots of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name's Chris Kendall. I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Was born in 1980 there. By the time of 19, I had lived on my own for 2 years or with a bunch of different skate friends, and my diet and lifestyle really went down south. My parents did a good job raising me and, mostly whole foods, a healthy standard American diet. But when I got on my own, it was like, dollar store and fast food and 40 ounces of beer and packs of cigarettes when I could afford them and weed nonstop. And long story short, from 17 to 19, I just really went down south. Achy joints, depression, candida chronic across my body, jock itch, toe fungus, all this really fun stuff. And,
Mm.
my goal of becoming a professional skateboarder was slipping away. I've been skateboarding since I was 6 years old. It was really my main motivating force for everything. And yeah, I was literally like going to bed, not wanting to wake up the next day. And I could go even more into that, but it was just, I was in a very dark spot and I knew I needed something. And the first thing I found was a yoga VHS tape in Walmart's bulk bins. If anyone remembers those, they had the VHS bulk bins, like $2 for any VHS tape. And I took that home. I started practicing it a whole bunch. It was a Rodney Yee intermediate power yoga class. And it changed my life because it just got me to focus. It really connected me more with my body and my breath, but also it got me interested in yogic literature, which talked about karma and abstaining from meat and all this stuff and diet in general. And I was just like, wow, like my mind was blown. I just thought this was a pleasure tube. I thought Taco Bell was like the height of nutrition, and I'd like be my happiest when I'd eat huge amounts of Taco Bell. But I checked that out, and it led me to nutrition books. And the first big book I found was called Fit for Life. It was one of those moments where I went into a used bookstore looking at the nutrition wall of all these books, and one book was just like, boo. I swear it was just like, that's the book. I grabbed it, and it may have not actually been shining, but my intuition was just like, boom, like this is it.
Yeah.
I got that book. I read it. I still recommend that book. Anyone who's interested in going in the direction of health and maybe isn't just ready to go 100% raw, this book lays it out from standard American all the way to high raw or raw foodist, and looks at it from a holistic perspective. So I read that. The big things that jumped out to me was eating fruit first on an empty stomach, food combining, letting go of animal products, keeping it lower fat, lots and lots of fruit, as much as you want, really showcasing it as the optimal food. And I started taking that on. And to kind of shorten this a bit, over about almost a 5 year period of time, I went from, like eating junk food and extra large bacon double cheeseburger pizzas every day when I could afford it to high raw vegan. And I really first started by just having fruit for breakfast and noticing food combining and implementing that and progressively getting more fruit and or simple vegetarian vegan meals throughout the day until a simple dinner. Eventually I dropped all that other stuff and went high raw vegan, which at that time I was living in Vancouver, working at an organic health food store and in the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition to become a registered holistic nutritionist. I'll briefly mention that all of this was really just for skateboarding. At that time, it was skateboarding so I could heal faster and I could skateboard more. But it more and more started taking over the rest of my life and becoming just as big of a passion, especially when I really connected with veganism. That totally blew open the doors to the compassionate reasons and all that other stuff. But even when I went into school, I was still doing it to better myself for skateboarding, and the other reasons followed behind. In the middle of that schooling, that would have been in 2004, I met Dr. Doug Graham, who was at that time, like a 28-year raw vegan, and had been like a headline speaker at all the major raw festivals in the world. I'd read a few books on raw food. I knew I wanted to go that direction. I tried a little bit, but I couldn't maintain it. I was already high raw vegan at that point for about 6 months. And then Doug just simplified it. I went to every one of his talks, and he literally glowed. I won't kid you. He was literally glowing. I used to have a history of using magic mushrooms and stuff like that, and going out into nature and seeing auras and stuff. And he was the first person I saw that had a physical aura around him without me being under the influence of a plant medicine. And I was just like, everything is pointing me towards this guy. I'm going to check him out. I stayed after all of his talks, talked with him. He was really gracious with his time. I told him my dream was to become a professional skateboarder and was already high raw vegan, but how to do this. And he just laid it out, man. He just made it simple. The next day I
Yeah.
went 100% raw. I remember walking down the street in Vancouver, going to the local grocery store to get food before going to the second day of the event and just crying because I was so open-hearted and so connected with purpose that at that moment I really realized that all of the stuff I was learning, all the stuff I was applying was what I was sent here for. And at that moment, really, that's when it shifted from just doing raw food for skateboarding to doing raw food as a profession. Before I didn't even consider it, even though I was in school. And so that was to me like a major Satori moment, a heart opening and a sense of connecting with purpose. And, from there, really, I went back, I talked to Doug, and I've stayed in touch with him since then. I've now written, a book with him and done retreats with him and been on stage with him and stayed at his house, consider him a close friend and a mentor. And I've got to learn from a lot of other people throughout the years. But that was really when I went full on. It took me about 5 years to decide that I was ready to promote it and live it as a coach. And I started my website, The Raw Advantage, and that's now been over 14 years, just full time living as a coach, running retreats, speaking at festivals, writing recipe books, all the while skateboarding, and more recently in the last 2 years, finally going pro. So, at
Congratulations.
43, now I'm finally a pro, and I'm getting my new board coming out at Christmas. Pretty excited for that. But that brings us up to present date.
Yeah, so not much then. Not much happened. Yeah, so I know so many people sing Doug Graham's praises, myself included. Like his book,
Yeah.
The 80-10-10 Diet, like it's basically a Bible in the raw food scene. And yeah, it's interesting what you say about the glow around him. I can't say I've ever experienced that, but I can envision what you saw. Yeah. So just to give the people a little bit of context, what weight are you currently sitting at, and like what height are you?
So I'm 6'2" or 6 foot 1.5. That point five is important when you're just about two. But and I'm about 175 pounds right now. And I find I fluctuate between, the heaviest I've been as a raw vegan and really low body fat percentage was 198 pounds. And the lowest I've ever been at the end of a fast was like, I think it was around like 150. So I'm kind of in the middle of there right now. Even just a few months ago, I was actually at 187 and felt pretty good there, but my skateboarding wasn't quite as good. It's just a little bit more weight on the joints and makes you feel a little
Yeah.
bit less fluid. So I've kind of adapted my workout and even my eating just a little bit for a period of time to come to what I feel is a more optimal weight for my skateboarding specifically.
Yeah, I think that's important because for me as well, when I first started this journey, only maybe 10 months ago, it was similar to you. It was for football, it was for athletic performances. When I say
Yep.
football, I mean like soccer for most of the world. But
Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was for that sporting standpoint, and I think it really resonated with me in that regard. So I think that's important, like you say, using it as a tool to fuel your
Yeah.
lifestyle and your goals. So yeah, do you say 175
Here, I
you're
can, I
currently
can,
sitting at?
yeah, I have my calculator right here. So 175
But
divided by 2.2, like
that's
basically
still quite,
79.5 or 80 kilograms.
yeah, that's still pretty big because a lot of people, they have this stereotype of raw vegans as being like skinny, malnourished, and they say you
Yeah.
can't build muscle on the diet. So what would you say? What have you noticed? What have you observed? When do you tend to gain weight on the diet, and when do you seem to be at your lowest? Now, it may seem obvious to you, but for many people, they
Yeah.
have these struggles, myself included. I'm currently experimenting with it and I'm seeing progress, but I think it would be insightful if you can share kind of your process.
Absolutely. And I want to share something really briefly before I go into that answer,
Sure, sure.
just because I think it is pertinent. Like if I listened to the mainstream advice, even from like qualified nutritionists and naturopaths and doctors, I wouldn't be sitting here what I'm doing. Like when I was in my first year of training to become a registered holistic nutritionist, that's when I went raw vegan, and I was raw vegan for half of that year. And my one head teacher told me, like, this is great that you're eating raw vegan. She was an Ayurvedist and really well knowledged and learned. And she said to me, like, it's great you're a raw foodist, but if you continue doing this, within 2 years, you will die. She said, fruits and vegetables are cleansing foods, and animal foods and cooked foods are building foods. And if you just continue with those, you're just going to cleanse yourself to death. And, obviously here I am nearly 20 years later and, able to put on
Yeah.
weight very easily. And I've had numerous doctors and other people, really second guess what I'm doing. And, fitness people tell me you need more protein and blah, 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 and here I am living it, doing it. And, it's just important to note that it doesn't mean they're bad or that they're wrong from their knowledge and experience. It just means that everyone is only privy to their specific knowledge, education, and personal experience. And maybe she's seen some raw foodists, which, didn't eat enough calories, which is very common. It's the most common reason why people fall off the raw food diet is either under eating calories or not having proper education. And it's a combination of those two often, right? So through learning it and living it, you gain personal experience and from their wisdom, and that is different than knowledge, right? So
Yeah.
I can say, the main difference between me being at 155 was, I mean, obviously I was fasting, or actually one time I got hit by a truck and I couldn't move and I wasn't eating as much. So I went down to really close to that weight, being
Yeah.
hospitalized and immobile for a
For
few
sure.
months, but at my heaviest, that was actually also kind of piggybacking off of that. That was 1 year after my accident, getting hit by a truck on my motorcycle, because I was basically put into a full-time rehab program where I was like in the gym 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. And
Wow.
at first, it wasn't really muscle building. It was really restructuring my firing pattern and also getting certain muscle groups that had turned off due to the accident. Like I ripped my quad tendon in half, and like my leg was
Wow.
literally on the doctor's report said mutilated left leg. And so it took like 6 months of working out where I was just really toning and rebalancing and sure building a little bit because I got to such a low, but it wasn't focused on muscle building. But once I
Yeah.
got to a certain point there, I had like 6 months of straight intensive, actually it's a little more than that. After about 8 months after the accident, I had nearly a year. No, sorry, I apologize. It was actually 1 year after the accident because I went to the UK Fruit Festival. It was a year after the accident that I had built up with that intensive 6 day a week training for like 6, 7 months, and then my own training, like almost as a bodybuilder, until that festival the next year. And I was able to go within that year period of time from 155-ish up to 198 pounds. And
Wow.
that's a big difference. And obviously, because I was
Mm.
already at like 185 before that, and then I lost so much weight due to the accident, that first amount was a little easier to gain. But even going
Mm.
from
The muscle memory.
185 to exactly the muscle memory, but even going from the 185 to like 200 pounds within 6 weeks of or 6 months of like really intensive muscle training, it's no small feat. It's on the upper edges of what the
Yeah.
textbooks kind of say you can do. And all of this just from eating until I really don't want, like almost the sticking the fork in you kind of technique, right? Where it's like every meal eating all I can and a couple bites more, always erring on more rather than less, and training really hard in a specific manner to build muscle. Because at that time I couldn't really skateboard. I mean, skateboarding is the love of my life, but I couldn't skateboard at the level I wanted to. So I was still progressively getting a little better at skateboarding, but I was like, I'm going to run this test. I'm going to push myself as hard as I can in the gym, and I'm going to grow as fast and as much as I could. And I proved to myself that it wasn't only easy to do, at least in comparison to what people would say it should be on a raw food diet.
Mm.
But it was relatively enjoyable, and I learned a lot from that process. And yeah, the results, to me, they spoke for themselves. It was quite easy, and I didn't have to concentrate on extra protein.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's opened a whole can of worms. There's so many questions that are running through my mind. But yeah, I think just from personal experience, like you said at the very start about most people actually undereat. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's true from first-hand experience. Sometimes you have to experience it yourself to actually, know what people are talking about. Because I read it in the 80-10-10 diet, but it was only, I kind of got swept in the, you could call it breatharian cult, or not cult, but, the real, I got caught up with ideals and living off of
yep,
prana and less and less. And I think it's just quite important that people realize that may be suitable for some people, but if you're really struggling, it's probably like Chris says, because you're actually under eating and depriving yourself and trying to go too fast too soon in maybe a direction you don't actually know where it leads. So that's just from personal
absolutely.
experience. But just on what you touched on, about eating more, I've experienced that myself as well, because fruit meals especially can make you feel really full, but then
Yeah,
later on you're like, oh, I'm hungry again. So
yeah.
a lot of people don't eat enough, like you say. But I'm just wondering, roughly, for the more scientific people, or the people who prefer like numbers, roughly how many calories on like chronometer or something like that do you consume now on a day to day on an average?
Yeah, on an average, and I don't really calculate it every single day by any means. I
Yeah.
don't obsess about numbers. Like at a certain period of time, I did learn about it. And just to also mention from kind of what you experienced as well, like I had the same thing in my first 8 months as a raw foodist. Although I knew a lot, I didn't fully understand caloric density and how, for example, like I could get all my calories met from say just arbitrarily 30 bananas, like the old site, but I'd be needing like double the volume of watermelon. I'd like instead of 8 pounds of bananas, I'd be needing like 21 pounds of watermelon to get the
Yeah.
same amount of calories. And I'd need like 36 heads of lettuce or something like that. No, it was like 60 heads of lettuce if I was
Yeah,
just
it's
getting it from
crazy.
lettuce, which is impossible. You can't really do it.
Yeah.
But myself, typically I eat probably right around the 2,750 mark. 2,500 to 3,000 is what I often say. And on a busy day, I'm easily eating more than that. I've eaten up to 6,500 calories in a day when I had like a really busy week where I was just blowing through calories. And the interesting thing to say about all that, though, is when you create the demand through exercise, which I recommend people do when they're eating their biggest sweet meal of the day. If they're eating a huge, huge meal of bananas, get some movement before. It only improves the insulin function and the muscle's receptivity to absorb those simple sugars and turn it into glycogen in your muscle stores.
Yeah.
But when you're creating the demand and when you're moving, more calories becomes not only enjoyable but easier to eat, and it just feels appropriate. So if I just tried to eat 6,500 calories today, I'd feel sick. Like I'd feel this is gross. Like I'm not moving that much. But in the time when I ate that much, I was so active and creating so much demand that those smoothies went down easy. And like it was like it felt completely appropriate. And for me, that's like, again, I could say that I'm 2,500 to 3,000 calories, but for someone else who's maybe, like 5'10" and 135 pounds, they might find that 2,000 to 2,500 calories is perfect. And, as a coach, I've helped a lot of people find their basic caloric needs. And a really, really easy calculation for that is you take your ideal weight and in pounds, ideal weight in pounds, you times that by 10. So let's just say for ease that someone's 150 pounds as their ideal weight. Maybe they're not even there yet, but that's where they want to be. You take that, you times it by 10, so that ends up being 1,500. You add 500 calories on top of that for a basic level of not inactivity, but not rigorous activity. That being because that ideal weight times 10 matches your basal metabolic rate. So what that means, that's the weight that if you got that amount of calories, you could maintain that weight if you just laid in bed all day and didn't do anything at all. So
Hmm.
500 calories on top of that is just for like a basic, pretty low activity person. But if you're going to add a lot of activity onto that, well, then you can roughly calculate your activity needs and add that on top of there, right? So for me,
Yeah.
that just shows that my basal metabolic rate right now is around like 170 or 1,750 calories, but I'm adding on top of that on average 1,000 calories because I live a moderately active life. And sometimes when I'm more active, like a couple days a week when I skate 2 hours and I'm going pretty hard, well, sure, I'm going to add another 500, 600 calories on top of that, maybe more. So I hope that kind of answers that question and
Yeah,
simplifies it a bit too.
for sure, for sure. That's very useful for me, and I'm sure for the audience as well, because there's a couple of things you touched on there that are brilliant, like the exercise. It sounds really obvious, but especially at the start of your journey, raw journey, you may not feel the need to exercise, maybe
Mhm.
as you're transitioning or whatever. But for me personally, when I stopped exercising, one, I obviously didn't need to eat as much. It makes sense, but
Yeah.
I didn't. And I was like, how do people eat such big meals? But like Chris says,
Mhm.
when you create the demand, the body's so smart, it knows how to adapt. So it becomes more enjoyable as well. Like you say, you actually enjoy your meal. You feel
Yeah.
like you've earned your meal. And
Yeah.
the insulin, what was the term you used?
The insulin function just becomes even more sharp and receptive.
Yep.
It's just amazing. Our physiology is designed in such a way where all this stuff is a lot simpler than people want to make it, right? And it's like I
Yeah.
don't recommend forcing food, and I also don't recommend forcing eating less food. It really just comes down to finding that balance between all you can possibly enjoy, and for most people, with most people's goals, a few bites more, because most people want to gain a little bit of muscle mass or look a little bit better, or they want to have high levels of energy. And knowing, like you said, that fruit is so damn satiating. It's really easy to eat just a little less than you think you need. And predictably, what I see people do is they eat a little less than they require. And within, they can manage that. They can feel all right with that. But after about a week and a half, 2 weeks, well, a couple hundred calories a day, after 2 weeks, you end up in a full day's deficit of calories. And that's when the
Yeah.
binge cycle starts. That's when looking at other food starts. That's when second guessing ourselves starts. And I'd like to briefly mention too, there's a big reason for this because fruits and vegetables are really high in volume. They're high in nutrition per calorie, but they're low calorie per volume, right? So our three basic needs for satiation are going to be volume, nutrition, and calories. All the other food out there is really low in volume, low in nutrition per calorie, but really high calorie. So most
Yep.
people and most diets, they have way too easy of a time getting excess calories, but they're always hungry and they're always looking to snack and eat more stuff. Whereas on a raw food diet, you're meeting two of those three needs very easily, volume and nutrition, but it's harder to get enough calories. And so it leads to people feeling totally satisfied, but slightly under eating calories. And I just always like to promote that this is a diet of abundance, especially if you want to be physical in this world, if you want to look better next year than you did this year, if you want to improve your athletic performance, and if you want to get enough nutrition to be optimally nourished. Doug Graham really promotes, and I feel the exact same way, that we cannot hope to be optimally nourished unless we have at least a baseline of some activity because all living beings are designed to be active and fit. We're no exception. And by being active and fit, you require more calories, which also means more total nutrition, right? So if we're inactive, we're getting less protein, less amino acid, like we're getting less of everything, right? So
Yeah.
just wanted to
Yeah.
piggyback that on top of this topic.
For sure, that's very valuable. I think, yeah, the calories per bite concept, I think Doug Graham calls it, is really important,
Hmm.
especially like you say as an athlete when you're active. And the body is designed to move, like you say. It's a lot of times people they put too much emphasis on food, especially when they're at the
Hmm.
start of this, and they forget the whole holistic health picture, body, mind, the exercise, the food, just everything. Too many to name off the top of my head now, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's a whole holistic picture. There was something you touched on earlier about fasting and eating less and things like that.
Hmm.
If people maybe enjoy the practice of fasting, I had a question earlier from a friend. She was asking, can she still build muscle whilst fasting, or at least intermittent fasting and like water fasting? Is it possible? Because obviously they might want the benefits of like autophagy, they might say, by like
Hmm.
the mainstream kind of terms.
Yeah.
Is it possible to build muscle whilst experimenting with fasting without putting the body in like a catabolic state where it's kind of breaking down?
It's definitely an interesting question, and I can't say that I'm an expert on fasting. I've definitely talked with a lot of different fasting practitioners. I've undergone numerous fasts myself, and I have talked to some people like Dr. Graham on this exact subject. He says that it's physiologically impossible to grow muscle while on a calorie deficit, or specifically when you're fasting too. And what you can do though is you can be burning through fat tissue and reducing your overall body fat percentage, which will make you look more ripped and maybe make you look in
Yeah.
some ways a little bit more muscular. It's really interesting because like I'm at 175-ish right now, and when I'm at 185, I mean that's a fair amount of weight. Like 4.2 kilos or something, 4.5 kilos, but I don't look a lot different.
Mm.
When you lose a bit of extra body fat, because I lost a little bit of body fat in that, it's definitely not a lot of muscle, but you don't really seem like you're a lot smaller, because you still have that tone and things pop out a little bit
Yeah.
more,
The
right? And
leanness.
so
Yeah.
during exactly that leanness, so I mean, when people are talking about fasting, I'm a big proponent of equating that to rest. And, if you're fasting, I wouldn't really recommend working out while you're fasting. I'd recommend fasting while you're fasting and abstaining from exercise and getting full rest. To me, the purpose of fasting really is to direct all the body's attention on the catabolization and the rebuilding, right? And like breaking stuff
Yeah.
down, getting the usable parts that can be recycled, clearing out old wastes and all that kind of stuff. But if instead you're also working out at that same time, well, you're not going to do either very effectively. If you're wanting to build, you're much going to be much more successful if you're at least eating the caloric needs that you have while you're exercising, because then you're going to be still burning and at the same time providing everything your body needs to be able to build. It's
Yeah.
and I don't know if that helps a little bit, but
Yeah, for sure. I think that's very important. It makes complete sense now that you've said it, but just kind of rest while you're fasting. So if someone was to maybe fast 1 day a week, maybe their rest day at the weekend, do you think that wouldn't have any kind of major impact on their physique or athletic performance?
well, the interesting thing about this, whether we're talking about intermittent fasting or we're talking about periodic fasting, like you said, 1 day a week, because the most common reason that people fall off the lifestyle is under eating calories, doing either of those practices makes it even harder. Because if you're predictably having 1 day a week where you're not eating at all, well, that's,
Mm.
for me, for example, that's like say 3,000 calories a week that I'm under eating for my total needs. And
Yep.
we can look predictably at the month or the year for someone's caloric needs, and they're pretty consistent based on someone's athleticism and their weights. So, to me, it's unless somebody has a lot of weight to lose, it's not really advantageous. I mean, in that scenario, as long as they're not trying to deprive themselves and they're not always hungry and like having hard cravings and stuff like that, sure,
Mm.
absolutely you can do that. But if you're somebody who's looking to add on a little bit of muscle or you're looking to improve your physique and stuff like that, then I don't really see that as a great way about of doing it, So it's going to
Yeah.
depend on the individual and the individual goals. But to me, periodic fasting or intermittent fasting makes more sense for people that are eating foods that are really high in caloric density. In fact, that's what they're usually utilized for, is people are eating foods that are a little bit overwhelming to their system and that they overeat habitually. So by having 1 day off a week, they can actually come closer to their needs and not be consistently putting on weight. Whereas on a raw food diet, it's already really, really light and simple for the body. It's really clean food. It's not like we really need to detox from that like in an accelerated rate. It's already fostering healthy levels and speeds of detoxification in our body. And, kind of actually what we were mentioning kind of before, I really think that the mindset of this being a marathon rather than a race brings more balance and ease and less frustration and chance of yo-yo type behavior
Mm.
within this kind of, dietary plan.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many things to dissect there. The first on my mind is just the fact that a lot of people tend to apply rules, like you say, for like the standard American diet to this
Hmm.
lifestyle. And that's kind of when they're not getting the most out of it because, like you say, it's already such a clean diet, high energy foods, you're not really having to fast from their negative impact as you would on like a standard American diet. But also something that came into my mind, people might be thinking, they might keep listening to the word calories, and they might be thinking, I'm not sure if I really believe in the calorie model, like how they burn. I'm not sure how they do it exactly, but they burn like a substance externally. I'm sure you know more about it
Yep.
than me, but how do you feel about calories? And also, do you feel like your digestion becomes more efficient? Do you need less calories as you progress on your journey?
Yeah, I think those are all really great questions. And the calorie model isn't perfect, but it's definitely the closest thing we have. And it's really predictable too that if somebody eats enough to maintain their weight, based on that general model that I gave you, then they're predictably going to stay at a pretty steady weight. If they take off 500 calories every day and they eat that consistently without short binge periods, because a lot of times people will say like I only eat this much, but they either don't know the amount of calories they're eating, or one day every couple of weeks they end up eating a big bag of nuts or something like that. I've seen it a
Yeah,
lot. I'm not saying every single person. I've seen that a lot firsthand, and it's predictable. If you eat more consistently, you gain weight, right? So again, it's not completely perfect, but part of the reason for that is that no two pieces of food are identical, right? So it's one of the beautiful things about the raw food diet. People go to McDonald's around the world and they get the exact same hamburger every single time. Whereas
yeah,
every single banana, every single mango, like it's going to be different, even from the same tree, from year to year, from batch to batch, right? So while again, I don't think it's totally perfect, I think it's the best model we have. And one mango of the same size compared to another could be like, 15% difference in calories, maybe even more, dependent upon the soil and, all the other factors that go into growing it, right? So it's not completely comparing apples to apples. Um, the last part of your question there, though, could you remind me of it?
yeah, sure. It was about digestion, and I'm
Yes, yeah.
personally interested in your journey. If you feel like now your digestion's improved and maybe you require less calories.
Yeah, that is a really good question too. And yes, definitely if your digestion improves, let's say after a fast, your digestion can improve to a point, especially if you come off the fast in a
Sustainable
streamlined
manner.
way, we'll say. Yeah, yeah, because oftentimes actually the hardest thing about a fast is the refeed. And if we overwhelm our system, well, we can, I wouldn't say undo, but we can definitely hinder our digestive capacity and diminish some of the benefits of the fast, right? So if we
Yeah,
come off of it in a slow and streamlined way, we can have improved digestion and be able to get more from the same amount of food. So yes, in my coaching practice, in my um, talking with other people who've been doing this and coaching people, athletes and a whole bunch of people for decades and decades, that number is often exaggerated from my perspective and my education. Yes, we can improve it, but not like cutting our calories in half, for example, as some people like to try and promote. I've never
yeah,
seen this. Again, people who are long-term promoting this and helping, who are also fasting practitioners and helping athletes and really on the pulse and not trying to make exaggerated claims. They don't see this. They never see this. Um, so to me, we're talking about single digit percentage points at the most, low 10 to 15%, something around there. That's just an
yeah,
arbitrary ballpark, but it's not going to be so significant. What I see more often is people becoming a little bit more spiritually bent, being a little bit more streamlined in their activities, doing repetitive activities, which also the body gets adapted to them and requires less energy for those. They get a little bit less, anxious and back and forth in their mind, a little bit more calm. And all of
yeah,
those things promote a little bit less calories. So maybe they eat a little less calories than they did when they were stressed out and running around like a hamster trying to be extra active, but they've come to a little bit more physical, mental, spiritual peace. And sure, maybe they're eating 15, 20% less calories, but I think it's a compounded issue, not just the digestion improving.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a really great point and good distinction to make, just about how many factors there are. It's not just the food,
Mm.
like you said, it's the lifestyle, the mental state, because that can really impact. your digestion, you know. If you're stressed out when
Yeah,
you're eating, you're going to feel like crap, you know, and you're not going to
absolutely.
absorb anything. And yeah, it's bad. It's bad. But I think it's good. This is why I love especially interviewing long-term people, people who maybe people could say are role models, or they've just been doing it a while. They stand the test of time, because it's one
Mm.
thing to be breatharian for like a year or something, but like you say, they might have reduced their exercise, they might have maybe improved their mental state a little bit, but to sustain that for years and years is quite, you know, I don't want to be a guinea pig. I'd rather follow the proven steps in every area of my
Yeah.
life. You know, I think it's important people have role models and long term people who've been doing it years, like yourself and Dr. Doug Graham. He's been doing it, what, 45 years now?
Yeah, I think around 45 years. And the thing that I like around that too is like, when I talk to Doug, I'm not just talking to Doug. I'm talking to thousands and thousands of people that he has experienced applying this and helping people with throughout his career, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, to me, that just brings extra weight to it when you see the same things predictably happen again and again and again with different applications of the lifestyle and different philosophies around how to do it. To me, it paints a really, really clear picture for, at the very least, the generalized outcome of all these different ways of applying it.
Yeah, I think those repeatable results are so important, because it's one thing, maybe one man, one yogi achieving this
Mm.
enlightened state and able to be buried alive or something. But for that maybe average Joe, they're probably thinking that's way too extreme for me. And
Yeah.
yeah, they need clear steps. And for me personally, I think that's really important. And another thing I wanted to touch on is it's a really like common buzzword and topic. It's just about supplementation,
Mm.
especially B12, because I know you experienced certain B12 deficiencies during your journey. So could you share a bit of light on your views on supplementation and your personal
Yeah,
experience?
absolutely. So when I first got into raw food, I guess I could back up a bit before that. Before I got into raw food, when I was in health, kind of the health aim, I was taking some supplements, not a lot, but some supplements. And when I first really got into raw food, came in through the door of natural hygiene, and from Doug to Herbert Shelton to TC Fry to another Graham and Sylvester Graham and some others. And a lot of that was really anti-supplement and really kind of black and white. And, like, even I remember reading one of the books, it's like, the intelligent man would do this. And it's like, oh, so if you don't do that, you're not intelligent. It's like, it's so kind of crispy, right? And, and, and I really took that on full force. I just felt like, yeah, of course, like this is the answer, raw food. And why would I need anything else outside of that? And, the doctors have lied to me for this. So obviously they're lying about this. And, and I took that full on, and I'll even admit I even had some pride in being supplement free, like that if I had supplements that it would be a failure or that it disproved the diet somehow. And at about year 6 of being raw, my parents, they weren't concerned, but they were interested to see, and they recommended I go get blood tests with my family doctor. So I went and I got like a full comprehensive panel and urine test, and he told me like asked me about my diet and stuff like that. And he told me he was a little concerned, but then he called me, I believe it was around 10 days later. He's like, "Can you come in for the results?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I came in and he had a huge smile, and he's like, "You know what? You changed someone's mind today." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "These are the best results I've seen in my career. Like I thought
Wow.
that you would need extra protein, extra calcium, vitamin D, like, a whole list of things." And he's like, "Everything was spot on. If this would have been like 5 months ago, I would have thought maybe your cholesterol was too low, but I just went to a revised symposium specifically on cholesterol, and your cholesterol is like that of a baby, like perfect, and like,
Wow.
and he did say though, the only thing is that your B12 is a little low and your D is a little low, but nothing to be concerned about, but something we should look at." So
Okay.
over that was year 6. From year 6 to year 10, I had, I believe, three other, yeah, two or three other full blood tests. And again, everything looked good. Everything was stable. I'm not someone who thinks that everyone needs blood tests all the time, but as a practitioner, and also because I hadn't seen many people doing blood work at that time, because this is now, that was like 15 years, 14 years
Yeah.
ago, right? Um, everything looked good. And to me, the value of blood tests is multiple tests over months and years. So you can see trends. You can see like, oh, well, yeah, my protein
Yeah.
was great then, but on year 8, it was all of a sudden way down. But that didn't happen. It's been stable. And the only thing that wasn't stable was my B12. And my D did fluctuate dependent upon the time of year I did my test. In the middle of winter, it's going to be a little lower. In the middle of summer, it is more than adequate. But the
Mhm.
B12 steadily got lower and lower to a point where I was symptomatic. Little teeny things were stressing me out. Like, my computer did something wrong and I'd be like screaming at my computer, and that was not me. I started
Yeah.
having back pain, but at the same time, I fractured my back too, so I can't say it was specifically B12, but it started hurting more, and that can be a symptom. And I was clinically deficient. Like I was at the range where I remember telling another long-term raw vegan, Don Bennett, about my levels. And he's like, "Come to my room right now and get supplements." Like he was like really concerned with how low my levels were.
Yeah.
And anyway, from that, I made the decision to supplement, and I got 2 rounds of injection B12. And then from there, I tried a number of different things over the years, sublinguals, patches, stuff like that. Nowadays, I do still do a sublingual. My levels have come up, my symptoms had gone away. And over the years, being at festivals, because I think I've been to over 15 festivals and run like 12 retreats, and been to other retreats and stuff like that. But meeting so many people, because some of those festivals have like 600 people, right? And traveling the world and
Hmm.
meeting other people, I've seen more than a handful. It doesn't sound like a lot, but more than a handful of people who have specifically went too far with that and didn't supplement and really regret it because they have long-term irreversible nerve damage, and they don't have the coordination they had before. They have some memory issues. They have still have tingling in their fingers and their feet. Those are some of the major symptoms that they started to get. And when you start to really get much past like tingling in your fingers, your extremities, and your toes and stuff like that, if you don't get it addressed, that's where permanent nerve damage can occur, and it doesn't seemingly come back, right? So,
Yeah.
all this to say, like, I'm not anti-supplement. If we're eating a well-balanced, well-rounded raw food diet and have a healthy lifestyle, the minimal supplementation is required. The only one that I personally recommend, at the very least, getting tested, every couple of years just to see and pay attention to symptoms too, is B12.
Yeah.
And I have taken vitamin D in some winters and stuff like that, but I prefer a vitamin D light or charged mushrooms over the supplement. But I think there can be a time and a place, and paying attention to symptoms and talking with others who have some experience and otherwise doing some lab work can really be beneficial and prevent issues long term.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially for peace of mind as well, because even for some people I know, just having the peace of mind of just supplementing, it's not the worst thing in the world. But would you say like if you obviously if you start experiencing symptoms, then definitely get your blood work checked, etc. But if people are feeling fine on the diet and the lifestyle, and they're not experiencing any symptoms, what would you say? Just carry on doing what you're doing, or still get tested anyway?
I think that just comes down to the individual and what their preference is. Some people have the strong preference of, doing something preventatively, and other people do it retroactively. And I think that's a personal thing. Someone definitely could argue that with something that is pretty predictable and has the widest consensus among most people within the vegan and raw movement, that B12 is a long-standing, not issue, but something to really be aware of, that preemptively supplementing, you know it's like what is it, I think it's like $15 a year to supplement, and there's no side effects known to supplementation. um
Hmm.
Again, I just think that becomes a personal kind of thing, really. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, definitely. Because I know Doug, I can't remember exactly what he said in his book, but I know his views were obviously like, don't, if you're really like declining in that, obviously don't be afraid to supplement. But do you know if Doug personally supplements?
I know he had to at one point in his life, and he hasn't since then, and it's been a long period of time. And there definitely
Yeah.
are a number of people who recommend that, or maybe don't recommend, but say that, as a raw foodist, as you're not taking in, supplemental B12, or you're not getting inadvertently supplemental B12 because it's put in a lot of processed foods, and most animals actually the largest consumer of B12 supplementation is the egg industry and animals because they supplement them in B12. If you're not getting it that way too, that over time you can get lower and lower and bottom out until your body becomes more efficient through digestion and utilization, that you can then from there come to a new appropriate level, which may be different than what the mainstream doctors say is an appropriate level of B12 because of the realities around supplementation, all those other things. That said, and like I always value everything Doug says. He has a wide range of experience. I just also have to consider my own personal experience and intuition and what I've seen. And to me, it's not worth the risk. Like I don't need to have pride around not supplementing. I'd rather not risk having neurological damage that is permanent. And having seen people get that from trying to maintain that model, it to me is just like, why risk it? That's just where I come from personally.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I don't think it has to
yes,
be a point of pride, and I also think that it's not a failing of the diet or lifestyle in any way, shape, or form. If we were living closer to nature and we weren't obsessed about hygiene and cleaning ourselves and cleaning our hands and cleaning all of our food, and we were drinking from natural streams that weren't polluted, back further back in time, and we didn't have like toiletries and toilet paper and hygiene, we'd accidentally wipe our butt a little bit and maybe touch our food, and B12 would be there, and we'd be eating food from the tree, not washing it all the time. B12 would be there, and B12 would
yeah,
naturally be in the water. So to me, it's just a reality of modern day living rather than a failing of the lifestyle.
yeah, for sure. Because not everyone can grow their food, and like you said, the soils nowadays with our modern living, there's a lot of beneficial technology and developments, but yeah, we have sacrificed certain things in the natural world,
Absolutely.
especially even just living in colder climates. You and I both, you live in Sweden, I believe, and I'm in the UK at the
Yep.
minute. A lot of people do say they struggle with this lifestyle in the colder climates. For me personally, I do a little bit in terms of the weather, but in terms of the food, I haven't noticed too much of a struggle recently. I feel like I'm coping. But do you have any tips for people who are living in a colder climate? I heard you mention there about the vitamin D lights. Is that the red light
Yep.
therapy device, or is that
That's a
something
little
different?
different. The red light therapy is more for boosting mitochondrial function, improving blood flow, and kind of just feeling good and healing. It's also good for scar tissue on the skin, promotes collagen production
Okay.
and all that kind of good stuff. So, but the vitamin D lamp instead, that is specifically UVB and C, I believe. Maybe it's UVB, but it's the spectrum responsible for vitamin D production in the skin, and it's just
Okay.
short bursts. Like three minutes a day, a couple days a week is all I need during the winter months to naturally
Wow.
produce the vitamin D3 in my skin. They are a little bit pricey, I mean, it's cheaper to supplement. I just, over years of occasionally supplementing and then knowing that I'm living in a darker and colder climate, I just decided to get a vitamin D lamp with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like a good investment. So in terms of the food, maybe like securing produce, which foods are like staples for you? What kind of tips do you have for people living in a colder climate? Just maybe touch on a few of those points.
Yeah, for sure. I even with Ted Carr, we actually even wrote a little book all on that. And I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
go
I
into
love
the
Ted.
main points in it, no problem at all. It's on my website for like $5, and I think Ted might be even just giving it away free because he kind of does that. But so you could probably find it with him. But the first thing I'd like to say about that is it's very common in the first year, 2 years of a raw food diet for it to be a little bit cooler and a little bit harder in the winter. I don't know the actual 100% specifics for that, but what my intuition and my education leans me to is that one, it takes a little bit for the body to get used to a slightly lower body temperature. Most people on a raw diet, they're sitting a couple points, like point 0.2 or point 0.3, I can't remember. It's a couple points cooler because one, they have a higher level of hydration, and more water in the body requires more energy to heat.
Yeah.
Two, most people in the first months and even year of a raw food diet are slightly under eating and they're burning body fat to make up for that, which again leads us to being a little cooler. And three, we're eating less digestion intensive foods, and digestion actually does create thermal heat in the body. So like if you're
Yeah.
eating warm and hard to digest foods, you just feel warmer. So all of that lends us to naturally feeling a little bit cooler in our body, which it is actually advantageous in the summer, but in the winter it takes a little bit of time to get used to. Beyond that, I do think there's also a aspect of circulation and circulation improving on this lifestyle over time. But what I can say from all this kind of ramble is that most people have a little bit harder time in their first winter or two. And then as they balance within the lifestyle, get used to it, also just go through a few seasons and the produce availability and all those different things, they start to have an easier and easier time to the point where it's like it isn't really much different. And if anything, my first tip there is that they just learn, okay, well, I put a little bit more bedding on my bed. I turn up the temperature in my house, maybe a teeny little bit. Um, I wear more appropriate clothing. Like in those first year or two, yeah, maybe you want to be putting on double socks, or maybe you want to put on long johns if you're cold. That's an easier solution than you know, trying to double down on like 10
Hmm.
times the fat or something, right? So those are some big tips is just, warm up a little bit the place you're going to be in, dress appropriately, exercise creates more muscle mass, which creates more heat, and also the exercise itself, of course, raises your core temperature. That's
Yeah.
the best way to feel warmer. Eat big, that's one thing too. Again, kind of that abundance mindset. And sometimes more dense foods can feel a little bit warmer too. So whether that's, bananas in the winter, persimmons, date meals.
Yeah.
When I was working outside, because I used to work outside in minus 40 weather, that was the last job I had before I started as a coach. I was working building apartment buildings in minus 30 to 45 weather.
Wow.
I would bring a liter of hot Datorade, so just hot water, like not quite boiling, but close to boiling, blended with as much dates as I required, and put it in a thermos. And then when I was really cold, I would sip and drink my hot date drink. And it's like I think sometimes people think that when you're a raw foodist that warm foods are taboo, or like you can't have tea, or you could never put your food on the stove and just gently warm it, not to boiling, but just gently. Like you can do all those things. There is no rule book. It just comes down to what makes you feel good, what makes this easier for you, what you feel personally comfortable with. Anyone who thinks that that kicks you out of the club, that's the club of one in their mind. It's up to us to define what our parameters are and what makes this easier for us and what sends us on more of like a binge kind of thought mentality thing. And that could be different for everyone. But things like that have really, really helped me. And I sometimes actually also like I don't drink tea, to be honest, like unless someone serves it to me.
Yeah.
But I do occasionally make tea Datorades. So like I'll get a caffeine-free chai tea and make the tea and then blend dates into it, and that'll be my lunch. And it's like warm and comforting and nice. And
Yeah.
I might do that on an extra cold day, or if I've been out and I've just been playing outside and I come back in, like, oh, I'm a little cold. Okay, I'll have this hot tea Datorade, right? And you could also swap the tea out for carob powder or cacao if you use that and make like a hot chocolate. You could even put dehydrated bananas in that for mushroom or for marshmallows, but
Yeah.
all these different things make it a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think, like you say, just the parameters as well, because we often set ourselves parameters and then we kind of forget why we've set them. Ultimately, you want to
Mm.
do what feels best for you and what's healthiest for you. For me personally, that's my approach. So I think
Yeah.
just not being so rigid and putting ourselves in a box and like, oh, I can't heat it slightly, like where you sat there shivering. I think not
Yeah.
beating yourself up if you breach these parameters that you've created mentally is really important. So on dates, I haven't eaten dates in a while actually, but what do you do with them? Do you tend to rehydrate them or like blend them into like smoothies? Because for me, they feel quite sticky. They feel quite low in water content.
Absolutely. Yeah, they definitely are. And if you just make a meal of dates as is in their dried state, you can do it, but it's definitely going to be heavier on your digestion. You're going to feel it. You may get some gas from it. And it's also notoriously poor for your teeth. In fact, I've coached
Yeah.
and known multiple people who have run into major tooth issues, not because of the raw diet, because they were consistently snacking on dates and didn't have a great oral hygiene plan, you know? So
Mm.
that's definitely something to look out for. I'd say probably 90% of the time when I eat dates, I blend them with water into a smoothie. It's one of my favorite smoothies, even just dates and water, but again, all the other combos I've mentioned, or dates and water with a cup of frozen blueberries,
Hmm.
amazing. And this actually kind of goes back to what we're talking about with caloric density. And something I did want to mention as well is my first 8 months of the diet, I didn't understand caloric density. I kind of mentioned that, but it led me to go to such a low body weight that I started having joint pains and hard cravings and all this other stuff.
Mm.
And like I was just looking too skinny, and people started to think like, oh, you don't look healthy. And then when
Yeah.
I understood caloric density and I started adding in more bananas and more meals with dates and stuff like that, I was able to maintain and grow my weight, you know? So I think that's important. But I can exemplify it by saying, like, when I'm eating a 2 liter banana smoothie, which for me, 2 liters is
Wow.
very appropriate. For a lot of people, maybe 1 liters, maybe one and a half. It took me quite a while to get to where 2 liters was totally comfortable and really easy. But if I have a 2 liter banana smoothie, that might be about 18 bananas, which is pretty common for me, and about 18, roughly 1,800 calories, right?
Yeah.
And I'll often have that for lunch because I usually just have 2 big meals. If instead I have a date meal, I might do about a pound of dates, which is a little less, like 1,650, 1,700 calories, and I'll blend that with about a liter of water, and it ends up being about 1.15 liters, like or like at the most 1.5 liters. And you know, I could add in a couple extra handfuls of dates and still have the same amount of calories, but with a half a liter less volume.
Yeah.
So sometimes when I'm really active, I prefer a date smoothie because I can fit that in even easier. And if I
Yeah.
want, I could even throw in 2 or 3 bananas on top of that and have like 2,200, 2,300 calories still in my 2 liter smoothie, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, that's how I like to make dates. But other ways that I really enjoy dates are pressed into celery sticks, and they just become like a sweet celery snack, and that helps to add more water content and more fiber, which slows the digestion. A savory sweet snack, really fun for travel. When I'm on airplanes, I know I mentioned that
Yeah.
before, but even just road trips, I like those. Apples, I don't make meals of apples, but if I make candy apples in season, that's something that's really good. Just pressing dates around the outside and press three
Okay.
or four dates onto every single apple, and 4 apples, you have a big meal. It's really
Yeah.
filling and really satiating. And having the celery or the apple at the end of the date meal, like a couple bites, helps clean your teeth as well. So it's kind of beneficial that way.
Yeah.
Um, I even have a mean baklava recipe that uses dates
Oh,
and
The Greek cakes.
yeah,
My
yeah,
family
it
used to
used to be
always
my
buy
favorite.
them.
They're
Yeah.
so good, man. It's so good. And it sounds oversimplistic and ridiculous, but if you just mash or slightly blend some dates with water to make like a paste, you add some cinnamon, and optionally you add a little bit of crushed walnuts. It's not the best combo, but I'm talking like a very small amount of walnuts crushed in there. And then you just layer that in between iceberg lettuce leaves, which sounds ridiculous, but you literally just layer it between iceberg lettuce leaves until you have like a stack, and it honestly tastes like juicy baklava. I didn't mention you add a bit of cinnamon and a little bit of clove to the date
Ah.
paste mix, and it's just like
Okay.
mind blowing, so delicious.
Okay. I'll tell my mum because she's got Greek family and they used to love those cakes, but they're so fattening and
They
they're
are.
not the most nutritious. But I'm sure for her, especially transitioning to raw, that'll be a good little recipe. Yeah. So there's a
It's
few
fun, man.
things you
And
said
I
that.
just got to say too, I got to say
Yeah.
one thing real
Sure.
quick because when I
Sure.
put out
Sure.
that recipe, I put it on YouTube, and I had some people, some notably Greek people, saying like, I'm Greek. This is not baklava. You are wrong. And my only answer there is, do not knock it till you try it. It sounds ridiculous. When I first came up with the idea, I was like baklava used to be my favorite. I've had lots of baklavas, and and yeah, when I first tried it, I actually on the video I made it. That was the first time I'd ever made it and tried it. So like I made it as an experiment video, and I was blown away. I was like, this is among the best baklavas I've had. It's crazy how good it is.
Yeah. I'll have to get her to make it. That's what I was going to touch on. A few things. So firstly, food combining, and
Yeah.
secondly, the smoothies. So I think we'll just start with the smoothies. how do you feel about digestion with smoothies, and how do you drink them? Do you sip them really slowly, or yeah? So how do you feel about them? Because for me personally, in the past when I've used maybe like frozen berries and bananas, I felt it didn't digest too well. So any tips for people with smoothies?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in food combining, especially as we're streamlining our digestion or if we have like a specific condition that we're looking to streamline our entire lifestyle plan. I don't look at food combining as a black and white rule that means good digestion or horrible digestion. Instead,
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of a continuum and a tool for optimal digestion. That took me about 15 years to come to. I used to be in the rule book of food combining, and I've often said that I was so intent on food combining that when I saw other people not combining well, I'd get a stomach ache. And I'm not even kidding, I
Wow.
would. And that actually also exemplifies it a bit. If we really see it as rules and we're really stressed and uptight about it, we can eat something that, now I would probably be totally fine digesting, but you may actually get major issues because your mind's like, oh my God, this is a poor combo. You tighten up.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so our thought does have a big impact on it. But that said, I still am a proponent of food combining because it does have basic principles which optimize and streamline digestion. It by example does. I've tried certain things that, didn't cause issues after I let go of it being a rule book, instead saw it as a tool. And some things I didn't notice an issue with, and other things I did still notice a bit of an issue with. One of those, for example, a lot of people say melons should only be eaten alone.
Yep.
I actually find adding citrus like lemon, lime, pineapple actually helps the digestion. For example, with watermelon, I never am satisfied if I eat a meal of just watermelon, and I'm more prone to melon belly, like a sharp pain,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially if I try and make a big meal of it. But if I squeeze lemon over top of all of it, I don't get that.
Ah, okay.
And I just feel I'm more satiated and it digests even better. And in my consulting practice, I've seen this to be almost completely universally felt for other people who try it, unless they're really just stuck on, nope, this is a bad combo, and they get stressed about it. So
Wow.
that's one. But the other one that I still do notice a little bit of not perfect digestion with is if I mix acid fruits with sweet fruits. So if I make a banana smoothie with oranges or grapefruit, which I see
Yep.
some people do, I can do it, but I notice my digestion isn't as good. I'll have more burps, more farts, that kind of stuff. And you know, that even can lend to when you said berries with bananas. I mean, strawberries are the only acid berry. All the other ones are subacid. So I've noticed if I do banana strawberry, while it tastes amazing, it tastes like strawberry yogurt kind of. I do notice that I don't digest it as well as, say, just bananas or banana blueberry, for example.
Yeah.
Now, I've blathered a lot, but kind of answering your
No,
question
no,
more
no.
directly then,
No, no. Keep going.
um, when I'm having a smoothie in an optimal situation, I'm mindfully drinking it rather slowly, chewing without being like obnoxious about it, like like I'm letting my saliva mix with the food. I'm enjoying
Yeah.
it and slowly drinking it down. And yeah, that works the best. Other times I might be in a rush or I might be like on the computer and drinking and I'm doing it a little less mindfully and I still find it digests really well as long as I'm paying attention to other aspects of digestion. And some of those might be one, making sure that I'm actually hungry. I'm not just trying to squish a craving or squish an irritable kind of feeling in my body.
Mm.
A lot of people think that hunger is anxious or irritable or specific when in fact it's a pleasant, relaxed feeling, often accompanied by salivation, not
Yep.
salvation, salivation, and it's not
Both.
like specific. Yeah, yeah, both exactly. So if we're having a anxious, irritable, hangry episode, we're better served to sip on some water and to ride that out for 10, 15 minutes until we feel calm and balanced and our body gets through that detoxification or cleansing cycle. Then our digestion is much more turned on and we're going to have an easier time digesting it.
Yeah.
The other thing is if we get some activity before, like we talked about before, if we're eating a big, banana meal, if we get even 15 minutes of activity before, or even better yet, if it's after a gym session or some sports, we're going to digest it way better. Um,
Mm.
if we're looking at that banana meal or even say a juicy mango meal and we're thirsty, but we just go straight to that food, we're not going to digest it as efficiently as if we would have had some water and satisfied our thirst first and then ate for food, you know?
Yeah.
If we're stressed, irritable, or tired, we're not going to digest it as well, right? So it comes down to a lot of these different factors, but the more we stack our cards in our favor and we make sure we're hydrated, we make sure we're rested, we get some activity, we try not to be in a high level of stress when we're eating, and we observe food combining and we eat, and like appreciate it, that's going to all lend to even better digestion with smoothies. Now,
Mm.
this all said, eating whole foods is going to be the easiest for our digestion. There's no oxidization. We're going to naturally want to chew it more, so there's going to be more of the enzymes mixing with the food. And that'll actually bring me to one last point I'll make on this,
Sure.
is I also am a proponent of vacuum blending. I don't do it every single time, but I actually really do notice the difference in the flavor, the consistency, the vibrancy, and the digestion. So I do vacuum blend as well, and that's been a little bit of a
Yeah.
game changer in what I do.
Yeah, just quickly, can you explain what vacuum blending is for the audience?
Yeah, for sure. So it actually has been fairly common in Japan, which often, they're a little bit ahead of the curve with some technology and stuff like that. And it's getting more and more known and popular in the States and around the world and stuff like that. But really all it is putting a vacuum on your blender carafe and making sure that the blender carafe or container is airtight, so that before you blend, you suck as much of the oxygen out of the container as possible, so that
Yeah.
there's less oxygen in the container to be whipped into the mix. And the reason for this is a lot of blenders are designed so that they really pull a lot of air into the food itself. And what that does is it actually, the oxygen diminishes the antioxidant capacity of the food. The antioxidants in the
Ah.
food itself are being utilized by the oxidization caused from the air being whipped in. And that's why like banana smoothies turn brown, and you know
Yeah.
often in a really powerful blender, they'll actually feel a little bit frothy and whipped. You'll actually notice there's a little bit of air bubbles in it, small but still in there. And it's been really shown and proven. I've done my little side by side tests, and I can see and feel and taste the differences. But it's also
Mm.
been measured that you can lose up to 60% of the antioxidant capacity in a regular blender compared to utilizing a vacuum blender. And if those antioxidants aren't being utilized in just that blending process, they can instead be utilized in the body for a whole bunch of different oxidative properties, and help us in our overall health endeavors. And the main differences in terms of what you personally notice though when you do it is the smoothie actually feels wetter. It sounds weird, but like it feels more like you're drinking liquid and water rather than a frothy smoothie that you feel the air bubbles.
Yeah.
Also, because of that, the flavor is more intense. The colors are more intense as well if you're like taking pictures and stuff like that. And especially if you're taking pictures over 10, 15 minutes while you're setting up all your stuff, because the antioxidants are also closely related to the flavonoids and the color in the food itself. And also, if you're someone who likes to make things and put them in jars and keep them in the fridge, or you're going to
Mm.
work, well, it stays fresher longer with less separation. So some smoothies, they separate. This helps it
Yeah.
actually stay more together and stay fresher with that higher antioxidant capacity. So it just lasts longer. And
Okay.
and I will just say really briefly too,
Sure.
I do have a video on hacking regular Vitamix and making your own vacuum blender. You can buy separate containers that go on Vitamix blenders, and you can even just buy vacuum blenders online of various different things, different brands. And I am also putting out a video fairly soon. I always say like in the next week, but it might be a week or two, specifically updating my hack video, the best hack that I've now found to make my current Ascent series Vitamix into a really high quality vacuum blender for reasonably cheap.
Perfect. Perfect. That explains a lot, because for me personally, I wasn't really enjoying smoothies a lot, but that's something I'll look into. It makes complete sense because I've heard just how it reduces the nutrient content. But yeah, I'll definitely look into vacuum blending,
It's good for
especially.
digestion too, because then you're not burping up the air bubbles, and it's like a little
Yeah.
less volume, and it's just a lot of people have
Yeah.
found that I've talked to that it helps digestion as well, actually.
Cool. Especially for people on the go, like maybe they're traveling or like you say, they're an athlete. They just want the calories quickly. Maybe they don't want to be prepping in the kitchen. Then it can be great because not everyone can really eat 10 bananas or something like that. They're maybe not at that current point. So I think smoothies can be a great tool there and
Absolutely.
not getting too caught up on, oh, I might lose certain nutrients. Yeah, but maybe you're not wasting an hour or forcing yourself to eat maybe like suboptimal fruit because it can mask for me. I've noticed if the fruit isn't the best quality, it can kind of mask a bit of the inadequacy, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. And I also really want to showcase and say that I'm not worried about drinking, non-vacuum blended smoothies by any means at all. I still have non-vacuum blended smoothies. It's not one of the once you go back, don't go back. It's like
Yeah,
I could
yeah.
I could travel and wherever I go, I'm not concerned about it. It's just if I have the ability, it is a preference because I notice the difference in quality and taste and all those kinds of things. And I totally 100% agree. If someone's having a hard time getting enough calories, it's much easier if you add in smoothies. And if um, yeah, it's much easier to get in more calories with smoothies, and it does definitely make like suboptimal or just mediocre fruit just taste a little bit better, And I mean, you can also, of
Yeah.
course, add in some things. So if you have bananas that just aren't amazing and you don't really enjoy eating them, just banana after banana, but you can blend them up and add a couple dates or add a little bit of blueberries, and boom,
Yeah.
twice as
So,
good, and you'll have way more enjoyment.
yeah, I think that's important because we always, myself included, I'm always thinking optimal, optimal, optimal. But if I really enjoy the taste of it and it's maybe slightly suboptimal, you know, then it's not really something to get caught up on because you've got to enjoy your
No,
life, you know. That's something I'm realizing and trying to do every day. And I was just going to ask you on the smoothie topic. I'm conscious of your time. I've only got a few more questions, but I'm loving where
I'm not
this.
worried, man. We could go
Okay,
as long as you
perfect.
want and split it into two if you want. I'm very happy.
Perfect. Okay, we'll keep it rolling. But I was going to ask you about juicing. How do you feel about juicing? Because there's a lot of dogma in this movement around juicing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The short answer, I rarely juice. If someone made green juices for me and bought the ingredients, I would drink them. I'd have a green juice every day. I'm not like against green juices. I'm not against juices.
Yeah.
I'm not strictly in favor of lots of fruit juices. I think that fruits are better with their fiber intact. It allows for a
Mm.
more streamlined absorption and less insulin spikes. Often when people are on a lot of juices or juices only, they can seem a little bit, what's it called? Stimulated, and I mean, it is
Yeah.
slightly stimulating. Like, can be like, I'm feeling so good. I'm on the juice, It's like, yeah, like,
Yeah.
obviously that's a thousand times better than eating, standard American food or cooked food or anything like that, But I am definitely more of a proponent of whole foods. I do think that Mother Nature did it right, and that the example of all the other animals on the planet and our physiology, it just sets us up for whole foods, and that there is a vast, distinct benefit to fiber. Most people don't get enough fiber. Um, so yeah, I'm more of a proponent of whole foods, but I think there can be a time and a place if people have a hard time getting in the greens and veggies, or they just really have a strong preference for juices, and they, even let's say someone's a little newer to the lifestyle and they're burning through old wastes, maybe they need a little extra alkalinity, and it can be beneficial to add in some green juices if their digestive system can't handle a couple pounds of greens a day. Well, yeah, sure. I
Hmm.
mean, add in the juices. It's a nutrient dense way and to get more food in for less digestive effort. But I would make whole foods the mainstay of the lifestyle. Short-term protocols are different from lifestyle to me. And I'm really much more in favor of lifestyle and getting used to a sustainable lifestyle rather than putting a ton of time and attention into short-term protocols.
For,
I sometimes do juiced smoothies too, so like say make a green juice and then blend bananas into it. I used to actually also collect
okay.
grass from my backyard, blend it with some water and make a grass juice, and then blend bananas into it as a inexpensive, free way to make green smoothies. Like you don't don't have to be buying expensive greens. A lot of times greens are really expensive, and to juice them, wow, that's a pretty hefty bill. But
Hmm.
any grass is juiceable, and as long as there's not animal pee or fertilizers or anything like that on it, you can juice it or just blend it and strain it through a nut milk bag. And I do want to mention that because you don't want to be eating the grass fiber. But if you get rid of the grass fiber, a lot of the nutrients can be in the juice or in the water.
Wow, that's something I've never heard actually. It makes sense to me because I've heard juicing greens is beneficial. So any grass in there in your back garden, as long as
Yeah,
obviously, like you said, there's no animal pee, which in my house I think the whole garden's probably covered in my dog's wee by now. But if you
yeah, you
want
could you
cheap,
could have a special patch. Yeah, and I mean
yeah,
if you're out in
reserve.
nature and you know what's going on, you can do that. Like I've been walking along in places where I know weren't sprayed and just grabbed a handful and chewed on the grass and spit out the pulp, and it's just like a free wheatgrass shot, or grass shot. Um, but yeah, I think I have a video called like unlimited free green juice, and that's basically the premise of it is that you can just utilize any grass and make it into green juice.
Wow, okay, that's something new, something I've never heard. But yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I've always thought, could you eat grass, or is there any beneficial nutrient in grass? And that makes sense. That makes sense. I wanted to quickly talk about. I just realised I didn't talk about kind of. Do you eat conventional? So just from the store or the supermarket, as people say. And how do you feel about like the organic versus conventional? Well, yeah,
It's a
yeah,
big topic, definitely a big topic. I'll start off just by saying that the majority of the food, like if I was talking about percentage points, probably the majority of the food I've eaten in the last 20 years is conventional, at least by calorie. I've definitely made more of an effort with, greens and certain fruits like strawberries and stuff like that to get organic or just, get wild and pick when I can. In certain circumstances and during certain periods of time on my raw food diet, I was able to get much, much more organic, say when I'm in Costa Rica or when I was living in Los
yeah,
Angeles and coaching a skateboarder who, just was like, go get whatever you want, like it wasn't on
yeah.
my
Happy
budget.
days.
Then I got a lot more organic. Some periods of time I'm getting 20% of my food organic, and some periods of time it can be up to 100%. But again, over the longest time frame, most of it has been conventional, at least calorie wise. I don't stress about it whatsoever. It's not something that brings up any anxiousness or worry. I have a preference in general for organic or wild crafted or self grown. But conventional has still served me well. It has led to, better healing than any healings that my doctors in Cairo have ever seen, better test
Yeah,
results than my doctors have ever seen, and fast recovery of my body and even mood and energy levels these last 20 years, right? So, and then when you really get into the weeds of it too, a lot of people like to make things black and white, like organic good, conventional bad.
yeah.
But things are very, very seldom black and white, and when you really, really look into it, in some circumstances, conventional is better for our health than organic. For example, there are some grapes that because of the less effectiveness of the organic sprays, because a lot of people don't realize like organic doesn't mean no sprays. It just means
Organic approved.
organic approved non-chem synthetic chemical based pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, all those different things, right? So in some cases, because the organic sprays are less effective than the conventional sprays, they can be using more of them more often and closer to actually bringing them out to the public, right? So in some cases with grapes, there have been tests shown that the amount of organic sprays is more detrimental to human health than the conventional sprays, So again, it's not
Wow.
totally black and white. It's not always better for human health. In general, it's better for human health. In general, it's better for the environment. But that also then comes down to, are these organic companies doing it for human health, or are they doing it for the organic label? And are they trying to cut corners or do false things, right?
Mm.
Are they supplementing their soil? Like some people like to say that organic always tastes better. And I'm sorry, I've eaten more produce than most people I know. And I've had conventional that was way better than a lot of the organic. And I've had
Yeah,
organic that
I
is
agree.
way better than some of the conventional. I personally just look for food, like flavor. Like I want to make sure it's really good quality because if it's tasting really good, that's one going to mean that it has a higher brick score, and two, much more likely that's going to have a higher nutrient density score as well, because all those things go into the flavor of the food. So my number one priority is to look for quality that tastes good, that I enjoy eating. Um, Two, that it's within a budget that I can maintain and afford. So most of the
Yeah.
time, if organic is about one, if it's comparable price or if it's like 1.5 times the price, then I'll get organic. But if once it gets up to double the price per pound or kilogram, I start looking really first and foremost, okay, is it that much better quality? Or would I rather have double the amount of the conventional and it tastes better anyway? So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah.
I also consider too, like I actually call farmers and I call the numbers on boxes of produce. I haven't recently for a while, but I have done that in the past and ask what are their procedures, like what do they normally do? And for example, with dates, I called the Bard Family Date Company and I called another company, this is probably 8 years ago, and they said that their conventional dates are essentially organic dates. They just aren't grown on the same certified land, and they don't spray the dates unless there's an infestation, which is very rare. I found the same thing out calling numerous persimmon growers, saying that essentially their organic ones are the same as their conventional ones. They only spray them if there's an infestation. So it's really
Okay.
rare that they're spraying them. So, again, this is one of those things where not everything is black and white. It's not as tied up in a bow as possible. And for me, what I feel the best about is to do the best I can and not stress it, because I think the stress is probably even worse for us than the conventional produce.
100%. 100%. I'm glad you said about the taste as well, because that's kind of my guideline and criteria. If something tastes good, then I think it must be full of nutrients and it must be beneficial, like you say. Because recently I've been reincorporating grapes more because I heard they were part of like the dirty dozen, they call it, obviously, some of the most sprayed things. But it's interesting what you say there about some conventional grapes being better than organic. So I think
Yeah.
there's so many different factors and just doing the best with what you have. Like if you fancy grapes, if they're tasting nice and they're conventional, then for me personally, I'm going to eat the grapes, you know?
Absolutely. And and another further thing to even say on that too is recognizing that the Dirty Dozen Clean 15 is done in the States in a certain area, testing throughout the States and stuff. And here in the EU, and I mean UK as well, there is much more stringent
Mm,
qualifications, not only for organic, but just for conventional produce. And a lot of pesticides that are legal in the States aren't legal here. They've been deemed to be
yeah.
dangerous for human health. So sadly, for everyone listening that's in the States and Canada, it is a little bit more hazy there as compared to Europe and stuff like that. And something I noticed specifically, actually, that's kind of neat to kind of showcase when I'm in USA or Canada, if I eat meals of conventional grapes, I get a reaction. Like I actually notice a little bit of a tickle in the back of my throat. My cheeks get rosy red and I don't feel
Yeah.
as good. And so when I'm in the States and Canada, I do actually opt for organic grapes. Or if I'm going to a farmer's market and I can talk to the farmer and ask him what they're doing, in those cases, I've had conventional and had no reaction. Whereas here in the EU, I've been getting cases like, I mean, it's ridiculous, getting cases of amazing, amazing grapes that are conventional, but they're like less than $1 a pound. Like they're actually less than
Wow.
that. It's just really, really inexpensive. So I'm eating a lot of them and I get zero reaction from. So I'm paying more attention to that, to my body and its feedback than, like the Dirty Dozen, because it doesn't always apply across every scenario. And it's the exact same
Yeah.
thing with apples too. In the States and Canada, I don't really eat conventional apples because I notice the difference. Here, when I eat them, no difference at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Just listening to your body and the intuition, I think it's really key. That's the main takeaway I've got from that anyway. And then I was going to ask you, especially with like grapes and things like that, how do you feel with seeded versus seedless?
Yeah, that's a huge topic too, and one that I intend to make a really, really in-depth video on because I've been thinking about studying and talking and taking notes from various different viewpoints for well over a decade on that. The condensed version of it is I'm not worried at all about hybridization. I mean, we're all hybrids. You're a hybrid, I'm a hybrid. Everything
Yeah.
that's living is a hybrid, unless you're a result of incest. The same family members in the parental units. Um,
You never
and
know.
as far as so like hybrids, like people talking about like bananas aren't real and blah blah blah. There's history of sweet bananas for 2,000 plus years, and bananas naturally went from seeded fruit to propagating off of corms off the root themselves. That wasn't human intervention. Even that said, I think that intelligent use of crossbreeding, just like, hopefully you're intelligently picking a partner that has the
Yeah.
traits that you want, is the same with, intelligently crossbreeding plants for the characteristics we want. Sure, can that go too far to the point where we're just focusing on sugar and not as much on nutrition? Sure, but I'm not really worried about nutrition when I'm eating the most nutritious foods on the planet, calorie for calorie. Um, so I'm not worried about hybridization. When we're talking about seedless fruit, fruits do go seedless in nature by themselves. A lot of people think that that doesn't happen, but namely the first seeded persimmons, and I mean a lot of persimmons actually, as the trees get older, they go seedless themselves. I prefer seedless fruit.
Okay.
I actually prefer seedless fruit every time. Um, Grapes, when they're found to go seedless, which they do in nature, then those plants can be grafted and you can then grow more plants. I'm not worried about grafting. That's simply taking an offcutting of a specific variety of fruit
Yep.
food and then grafting that onto the stem of another variety. And it's amazing because, like, let's say you have an orange tree, right? And the oranges on it suck. That happens. Like, when you grow
Yeah.
from seed, you don't get an exact genetic duplicate of that fruit. It's a new one. So you can have the best oranges in the world, grow that fruit from seed, and it has a completely different orange that sucks, right? Well,
Yep.
that tree's already big, it's already fruiting, it's taken a long time, some investment. You can cut some of the branches of that, and then you can cut some branches from that other fruit tree that had amazing oranges, graft it on. You just cut it in a certain way, put it on there, and wrap around it so that it actually attaches to that plant. And then that branch will grow the same fruit from the original. It'll be like perfect. So, and you can do that,
Wow.
like you can take six different varieties of citrus, graft them all onto that original tree that had crappy oranges, and have six different varieties of oranges on that same tree and not grow any of the crappy oranges that it originally grew. And, like,
Wow.
yeah, I can understand why some people might get a little bit weird about that's on the extreme end of grafting and stuff like that. I have no qualms with that. Um, Other methods of producing seedless fruit are just making sure that the flower isn't fertilized, so it'll just then produce a fruit that doesn't have the viable seed in it. It may have some seeds in it that are very small and basically unfertilized, and you don't notice them.
Oh.
That's the case with grapes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Similar with watermelons and stuff like that. So yeah, the science is pretty clear that there's no negative ramifications of it. Just like if I got a vasectomy, for example, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, I'm an unvital, horrible person that I would never want to deal with. Well, an unfertilized fruit that, for the first place, the seed itself doesn't really want to be eaten. Um,
Yep.
Usually with grapes, for example, the seed's really bitter, and while some people
Yeah.
may
Yeah.
enjoy crunching on a few seeds, I don't really know anyone who enjoys eating pounds of grapes and chewing every grape seed. I'd
No.
much rather have the seedless fruit. I'm not concerned about the nutrition difference. I'm not concerned about it not being vital. Um, Nothing to me stands out as that being really a logical outcome, more so an emotional thought around a philosophy. So, but I'll go much more
Yeah.
into it when I make a dedicated video because there's a lot more info on that subject.
For sure. For sure. I'll be very interested in watching that. It's a very nuanced topic, and like you say, there's so many different aspects. Like everything we've talked about, there's no black and white. And
No.
the greater you dig, the deeper you dig, the more you realize, just like, especially with these studies, like, oh, then they studied a rat and injected them, and it's like, it's not really relevant. So, like you say, once you
Yeah.
dig deeper, you realize it's just like a buzzword. Like people love organic or seeded or hybrid or GMO, things like that. But yeah,
Huge,
intuition is
huge.
best. Yeah. And,
I do want
and
to
like,
mention with that too, like I apologize to interrupt your flow. I just want to make
no, no,
sure
no, no,
this
no.
comes across too. Is you know, if someone really notices, like, hey, for example, I know some people who are like, you know what, I always go for seeded watermelon because it tastes better and it digests better for me. And if that's the case, heck, I mean, if your preference is seeded, that's great. I'm not trying to say like seeded is bad. I find seedless to be very enjoyable, easier to eat, especially if you end up smoothieing it. Like I like to make banana grape smoothies, and I'm not going to do that with seeded grapes, you know. They're
Yeah.
often less expensive, they're more accessible, and I can't see from any point of view why there's any detriment to having them in comparison, especially because I genuinely enjoy them more. And enjoyment of your
Yeah.
food is a big factor in your overall well-being and health as
It's
well.
key.
And that's the only thing I want to mention on that too is if you really feel like, oh my God, like I so prefer seeded fruit and I digest it better. Also, I'd invite thinking into that and thinking, okay, is that because I think it's better and because I stress if I don't eat seeded fruit or I have some kind of tightness in me thinking I'm doing
Yeah.
something questionable? And if that's the case, see if you can let go of that and test it from more of an even kiltered place of experimentation. And that's something that I've found really valuable within this raw food lifestyle as a long term is letting go of fears, letting go of judgments, letting go of right and wrong. Eating a raw food diet doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you more worthy. It just brings about your higher potential for certain aspects of life. It simplifies your digestive processes and your nutrients you're getting in and all that kind of stuff. So having that flexibility and that knowledge that no matter what you choose, it doesn't impact your self-worth. I used to beat myself up. I used to think if I wasn't a raw foodist, I wasn't as good. I wouldn't succeed. I put everything on raw food. Like raw food
Yeah.
equals success. There's a little bit more to it, and our mindset has a lot to do with it. And if we're judging, if we're, whether it's ourselves or others, and anxious about certain foods, that's going to have a pronounced effect, and it can actually impact our view of how things are from a less accurate place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think that's really, really important for me personally. I think basically everyone in this movement can relate. I think at one time we've all put so much weight on the diet, like, oh, the diet is because of the diet, blah blah blah. But there's, as we've said, there's so many different aspects to health. It's a whole holistic picture. So, like you say, just letting go of concepts and just actually, from a non-biased, neutral point of view, just experiencing something for yourself and then seeing how it resonates with you and your body. That's really, really key. And I'm glad you've highlighted that. And especially coming from someone who's been doing it 20 years, I think that's quite valuable for everyone to at least give a little bit of credence and a bit of credibility. So yeah, I'm getting
Absolutely.
conscious of the time here, especially on
Okay.
these kind of diets. I myself feel the need to wee a little bit more, so I'll just,
Yeah,
yeah, I
I'm near
don't think
there
I'm the
too.
only one.
I'm near there too.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll just end with the 10 rapid fire questions that I've recently
Can I add
started
one
doing.
last thing? I just want to add
Sure,
one last little
sure,
thing.
of
With
course.
what we were just talking about too, I think it's also important to recognize that where we are right now isn't where we're going to always be. And our digestion, our mindset, our all of those things can change our microbiome and all those things. So that's why, again, I do recommend flexibility and non-judgment and honoring our true callings, what we really want to experience in this life, from an unbiased, unjudgmental mindset, and recognizing too what our experience is from that. Let's say you have, a smoothie or you have a different dish with different ingredients in it. You know, it may feel different in your body now than it does in 6 months when your diet has slowly, progressively changed little bits here and there. And
Yeah,
so I just want to mention that because sometimes people can, let's say they've just been juice fasting or they've been mono eating and they have a salad. They're like, oh, well, this obviously isn't good for me. Greens aren't great because I got burps and maldigestion. Well, if instead it was a slow incremental increase in the amount of greens and diversity in your diet, your microbiome can change. And 6 months later, you might have that same thing and digest it perfectly. Whereas some people might make the decision, well, again, greens are bad. I shouldn't have them. They slow detox, right?
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
on the concept of 6 months down the road or a year down the road, it can be a different experience. And, we can find out different information that leads us to different outcomes around those same kind of realities.
yeah. Yeah, that's really important, especially for me because I'm quite a simple eater, especially mono eating. But now I'm getting a little bit bored of that. So I want to reincorporate more greens, more variety in my diet. So I think that's really important. Like you said, just because it's like this now, it's not always going to be this way. It's like when I went from like
Mhm.
7 days of watermelon, then I introduced another fruit. I can't remember exactly what it was, But yeah, it felt way more dense and heavy. But that's obviously compared to the watermelon. It's not like the other fruit is
Exactly.
bad. It's just the
Hmm.
standpoint you're coming from. And at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
like you say, just slow increments and just,
Yeah,
yeah,
because you might see me eating like a 5 pound dinner stew and be like, oh, well, I'll try that. And then you try it and it's like
yeah,
disaster,
Whoa.
whereas the surest way, another raw food presenter made a book called Green for Life, Victoria Botinko. And they actually did studies on this showing that if you just add like a small handful of greens to every smoothie or just every meal, you just instead of having like a 5 or a couple pound green salad at the end of the day, you just add a small handful to every meal you eat. So like at the end of your mono meal, you just have a small handful of greens. That
Yeah,
slowly increases your hydrochloric acid or your HCl in your stomach, which improves the digestion not only of the greens but of protein and amino acids, and is of benefit to have a slightly higher HCl production anyway, then all of a sudden your ability to digest greens slowly ramps up. So it's just like, slow increments of adding a little bit more if it's something someone wants to do. I definitely do think in the long term, greens are a
yeah,
really important part of the lifestyle and the diet. Fruit being the caloric source and greens being a little bit of an extra punch in minerals and amino acids and all that good stuff. But slow and steady wins the race. And
yeah,
recognizing again, this is a marathon rather than a race
yeah,
is a really advantageous way to look at it, I think.
yeah. That's a very key mindset to adopt. Long-term thinking in anything in life always seems to
Yeah.
serve you better rather than the short-term instant gratification. But yeah, great point. So I'll just run through these 10 quick fire, rapid fire
Sorry.
questions.
I get
No, it's
excited
all
and just
good.
want to blurp everything out.
No, 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 it's all good. I'm just conscious of the bladder capacity. But yeah, anyway, so number one, what's your favorite fruit?
If I have to pick one, durian. But
Yeah, I've
I
never
wouldn't want
tried
to
it.
eat it as much as some others, like mango, maybe, bananas for utility and inexpensiveness, like, yeah, but flavor wise and just like while you're eating it, just like being like, oh, eyes rolling back is probably durian.
Yeah, it's something I'm going to try once and then probably leave it at that because it's quite fatty, isn't it? But
It
yeah,
is fatty, but I tell you, it's like 15 to 25%, so it's less than an avocado,
oh,
for example, and it's sweet, and it is the king of fruits. It's higher in protein than most. I don't eat it for nutrition. I eat it because you
it
can't get
tastes
that
great.
flavor anywhere else. It's like the absolute best, like vanilla custard or like hints of any other flavor. And I always recommend, this is actually something that is poignant just because you mentioned it. I always recommend trying a new food at least 3 times because you never know the quality. I've had durian where I ate it
True.
and I spit it out, and then I've had times where I swear I was like, "There's nothing better than this on the planet," and like it's amazing. People will travel across the world for it, and with good
It's
reason. It's the king.
it's true. It's true. You can't knock just one fruit. You've got to try it, like you say, multiple times. That repeatability.
Yeah.
Anyway, describe yourself in one word.
Silly.
I like that. I like that. What's one thing that everyone needs to buy?
Ooh, that's a good one. Pants.
Yeah, yeah. In this day and age, it's quite useful. What's one book that everyone needs to read?
Ooh. I'm gonna give you two. For food, I'm gonna say 80-10-10.
Yep.
And for philosophy, Beyond Words by Siri Sachinanda.
Okay, okay. That's something to add for the reading list for me. What are three things you can't live without?
Love, activity, and sleep.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess food should be in there too, but
yeah, yeah. That's great. What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received? Now, this can be from someone else or intuition, internal.
wow. Um, I'll just go with my first instinct because the first thing that came up in my mind was to not take anything personal.
Yeah, yeah. That's key.
There's a million things I could say, but that was the first one.
Yeah, yeah. No, you. That's good. You trust in your intuition. What's your greatest strength and biggest weakness?
Um, Probably counting everyone as my friend. Like I live with the belief that everyone's my friend. Just some people maybe don't consider me their friend back. So it's I'll open my heart to anyone, and like give everyone at least one chance, and sometimes two, but even still, if they betray me, they're still my friend. Like I always have love in my heart, but obviously that could backfire in some ways as well.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I choose to see that as positive. So, yeah, I like what you did there. You combined the two, so it's like greatest strength and biggest weakness into one. That's pretty cool. I like how you interpreted that. Um, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Ooh, that's good. I mean, it wasn't that long after I was 23 when I really got into raw food. I think if I 20-year-old self, maybe I would have implemented this a little, just that little bit sooner, and told myself also to relax with it because I was, like I said, I was so black and white. It was like, you
Yeah,
know, especially when I first got into raw food, it was like perfect raw
yeah,
foodist, perfection and ascension, or falling into the pits and being a wasteoid, is so black and white, so being a little bit easier on myself with it and just having a clear direction.
yeah. That sounds a lot like me at the minute. So, and I'm 20, so you're kind of speaking to me there. That's something I need to implement. Do you believe in having a purpose? If so, what's your purpose in life?
Yeah, I think purpose is incredibly important. People that are purposeless, they are going to be living with less enthusiasm, less happiness, and less longevity as well. It's kind of proven that, purpose brings us to higher heights and longer lives, so
Yeah.
unless maybe that purpose is like jet fighter flying or something, right? But yeah, I'd say my purpose, what I've really aimed with, is to live my life authentically with a drive for self-improvement and compassion at the heart of it, and to make a living doing that. That's what I feel my purpose is, just to like try and live it,
Yeah.
like try and live the health model in a balanced way where it's not just only health. It's like living a happy, content lifestyle, and just share as much as I can to help people to do the same.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I think that's a great purpose for anyone to have. And finally, what are you grateful for today?
Oh man, I'm grateful for everything. Honestly, like I'm grateful to be able to have this conversation with you. I'm grateful for the big stack of food I have ready for me in the kitchen. I'm
Me
grateful
too.
to go to the bathroom later. I'm grateful
Yeah.
for my little kitty here, all curled up, and grateful to have this body and to be able to express it through my skateboarding and all the other things I do in my life. So, my family, my friends, yeah, there's too many things to be grateful for if that's possible.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. Or it definitely. I don't know. Yeah, I agree. And finally, it's been great speaking to you. So feel free to let the people know where they can find you, what you got going on in the future. Yeah, just plug yourself.
Appreciate that. We appreciate that. Well, you can find me everywhere with the Raw Advantage, but my main website's just therawadvantage.com. I've
Yep.
got the peace, loves, and seasonal fruit vibes going on. That's all on the Raw Advantage. I have a free app that you can get through my website that's available on Android and Apple, and has like 100 plus free recipes and videos and food
Oh,
combining chart and succinct information on there. I have a retreat going on in January, Costa Rica. There's still a few spots. It's a raw
nice.
food yoga surf adventure. So it's like the deal is fun, but there's education and learning how to make food as a chef. Obviously, got lots of recipe books and all that fun stuff. Yeah, that's the main stuff. I got a lot of other fun stuff coming on, but you can connect with it on my hub, therawadvantage.com. If you sign up there, you get 3 free ebooks and my curated email list, which has, like I have like 600 videos, but for a year it sequences out what I think are the best recipes, most important
Oh,
information, and interviews, you know, weekly in your inbox. So you just get hand spoon fed it, right? But that's all
yeah.
therawadvantage.com. You can find it out there.
Wow. So a lot going on, a lot going on. I'll be checking out some of those resources for sure. But yeah, thanks for this, man. It's been great. It's been great. And yeah,
Reciprocated, man. Absolutely. I appreciate you inviting me on and all the good questions. And, it's fun connecting with you because I see my mirrored self too. Like you're a little bit earlier than I was. I got into health at 19, but I didn't dive into raw food until I was really like 23, 24. So you're an amazing spot. And I feel blessed to be able to talk to you from where I am now. And hopefully it connects with a lot of people that
yeah, I'm
are
sure
in
it
your
will.
following.
I'm sure it will. Beautiful message. Peace and love, everyone.
And seasonal fruit.
Ooh, don't forget to check out my raw recipes playlist in the top left, the video just for you in the top right, subscribe for more videos in the bottom right, and get your 3 free ebooks in the bottom left. Grab your free raw recipe app, available on iPhone and Android with over 100 free raw recipes, common fruit and vegetable calorie breakdown, frickin' raw food combining chart, shopping cart function, and so much more.